Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started with the late afternoon portion of this. And so we have our first presenter, and Adibuzzaman, you have the floor.
Thanks, Cliff. So my name is Mohammad Adibuzzaman. I'm a research scientist at the Regenstrief Center for Healthcare Engineering. So my background is computer science by training. I'll start with how healthcare research is done currently with data-driven systems. So currently, biologists or different clinical application areas work within a subsystem of the physical human data dimension, different dimensions. For example, we have proteomics core facility in Binley. There are electronic health records analytical tools. There are genomics or imaging techniques from different dimensions. So the challenge right now is twofold. Number one, how do we integrate these different dimensions of data in a private cloud computing system that also takes care of the security and the privacy issues? That is number one. The second is, how do we also add the time component, which is longitudinal over a period of time? It could be few days to few years. So these two aspects traditionally are not addressed in biological research, in genomics, proteomics, electronic health records, whatever dimension you can think about. So what we are trying to do here is build a computational platform where the first layer is the high-performance computing system, how we can create database technologies or run parallel systems in an efficient manner. Second is the privacy and security component, where we must conserve the privacy of individual patients. And finally, how do we generate evidence from this big data? And that part is the area that we were working on in causal inference. And that is also a critical component because historically, evidence generation in medicine has been dependent on randomized control trial. And randomized control trial is very expensive, but the key reason for using randomized control trial is that we can remove certain kinds of biases, for example, confounding biases, by doing those experiments. But the big data systems we have right now have this biased information. So how do we remove those biases? So that being said, what we propose here is that we'll build a computational software hardware data ecosystem similar to an Apple App Store, but instead of an app, we have data hardware and the corresponding software in an environment where all these different data types, from imaging to electronic health records, from time series, can be integrated. And on top of that, we can have the computational engine for artificial intelligence for causal inference. And ultimately, this can be used by both researchers, and they can reproduce any research project with a single mouse click, starting from raw data to analysis pipeline to tables and figure generation. And at the same time, eventually, hopefully, the clinicians in practice can be able to use that in real time. So with that goal, we have some challenges. It's not easy because humans are complicated and systems are also complicated. So in terms of our proposal scope, we have few different challenges that we are trying to address in this proposal. Number one is how to integrate heterogeneous types of data in terms of the software technologies. Number two is how to handle missing data or different timestamp data that are sampled at different timestamps. Number three is how do we build the cyber infrastructure in an open and flexible scale so that we can build with terabytes and petabytes of data. And also, we must take care of privacy and security. And finally, the reproducible aspect, which is the causal inference and AI part, is also very crucial in this software hardware data ecosystem. So we have already built a prototype system in terms of that. This is a 300 terabyte computing system developed by Regenstrief Center for Healthcare Engineering. And we are using open source technologies right now. And so far, we have worked with time series data, mostly from physiological monitor devices, and also from electronic health records. And the electronic health record component, we have multiple big data sources, including one data source from Cerner Health Facts that have 60 million patient cohort over 20 years. But this is mostly electronic health records. But now we are also looking at other Discovery Park and Purdue campus-wide initiatives, including PIN, drug discovery, Binley Bioscience, how we can create the pipeline collaboratively by looking at the big picture and the research question first, and then develop the system development from that perspective. So what do we do with that system? So ultimately, our goal is to build a system where we can ask the clinical questions. So here is just one example of a clinical question that we have worked on so far. So this problem is for hemorrhage detection from blood pressure or any other sense of data. So when someone has internal hemorrhage or losing the blood volume, the autonomous nervous system responds in a way so that it compensates the blood loss. But this is one of the leading cause of traumatic death, death in traumatic injury cases. So if we can know which person is having internal hemorrhage at an earlier stage, we can detect that or save that life potentially. So here in this picture, you're seeing the red vertical line is the starting point of a hemorrhage, and you see the nervous system is responding by increasing the heart rate to compensate the loss of blood volume. So one question might be how we can develop a computational model where we can contextualize different sources of data, including electronic health records, their previous comorbidity, biological aspects, and also the time series data, and detect the blood hemorrhage at an earlier stage. Another example might be atrial fibrillation detection from sensor data. So atrial fibrillation is irregular heartbeats, pretty much. That's the definition. And that's also a leading risk factor for stroke. So a regular heartbeat has PQ, RST, these different components. So an irregular heartbeat might have, for different reasons, like absence of P wave or presence of F wave, or some other irregularities. So how do we again classify atrial fibrillation from sporadic and episodic data by contextualizing the other data sources? So that being said, our goal is to create the software hardware data ecosystem to improve healthy lifespan and also contribute in human longevity. And we are trying to work collaboratively with other disciplines at Discovery Park. Thank you.
We do have time for a couple questions. There's one way in the back. Luciano's back. Go ahead, Luciano.
How you're integrating the medical records from every hospital in your database? Because every hospital have a different format, they use different software, and how you're doing that integration, because that's the major challenge.
Right. So far, the initial prototype system that we have developed takes advantage of the existing database technologies and the big data systems. For example, if we are looking at 3 types of data, time series is one database, let's say it's HBase. Then SQL is another type of data. And then imaging is another type of data. So Hadoop actually provides a framework like Spark or Spark engine where you can communicate with different database engines. And on top of that, you can have programming language interfaces like Jupyter Notebook or Python or R to communicate between these different databases. But of course, there are computational memory and optimization of kernel. Those issues are open research problems, and we are addressing those as we go.
Thank you so much. Okay.